Hey everyone, welcome back to The Explainer. So today we're diving into a truly fascinating perspective on mental health and human struggle. We're doing a complete overview of Chapter 12 from our source text, and it's all about narrative counseling. If you've ever felt, totally trapped by a problem, or felt like a problem was just this hardwired part of who you are, well, this explainer is going to completely flip that script for you. We're going to look at how the stories we tell, and especially the stories society tells about us, literally shape our daily reality. But more importantly, we'll see exactly how we can rewrite them to get our freedom back.
Okay, here's our roadmap for today's Chapter 12 overview. We're going to kick things off with the postmodern paradigm shift, then move into power and dominant narratives, followed by narrative counseling principles, and we'll wrap it all up with a technique called externalizing the problem. Let's jump right into Section 1, the postmodern paradigm shift, a new foundation.
So to really get this, we have to look at how modernism and postmodernism offer two completely different ways of viewing the world. According to the text, most traditional American family counseling shares a modernist perspective, kind of like medicine or the hard sciences. In modernism, there's this firm, objective reality. There's an absolute essence to everything, and universal rules just apply across the board. In that worldview, people literally have problems, like psychopathology is viewed as a real, defined disorder living deep inside a person, almost like a medical condition you have to diagnose and cure. But postmodernism? It rejects that entirely. Postmodernists argue there are no essences. Instead, there are multiple realities existing all at once. And these realities aren't just sitting out there waiting to be discovered, they're actively socially constructed by the people experiencing them. In this view, problems aren't medical conditions you have, they're stories that you live.
Which brings us right to social constructionism. In this framework, reality totally depends on the relationship between the observer and the thing they're observing. Reality isn't some fixed, immovable object, right? It's a fluid, evolving narrative. The text points out that these socially constructed realities usually take the form of stories. And the absolutely crucial part here is that each story depends entirely on who is telling it, who's listening, and what the purpose is. Families, for example, often get stuck in what the text calls problem-saturated stories. That's when the problem just becomes the loudest voice in the room, drowning out literally everything else. But, and here's the kicker, solution-oriented stories can exist right alongside them. They just might be temporarily ignored or deflected because that problem story just feels so incredibly heavy.
Moving on to Section 2, Power and Dominant Narratives. Who writes the story? As Friedman and Combs put it, we are born into the dominant stories of our local culture, and they shape our perceptions from that minute on. Narrative counselors recognize that, we don't just build our personal stories in a vacuum. Society has a massive head start on us. A dominant culture creates viewpoints and stories fundamentally designed to serve the people who already benefit from that culture. And unfortunately, as the text notes, those dominant stories often work in direct opposition to the freedom and well-being of marginalized individuals and families. You see, these dominant societal narratives can be incredibly oppressive. Societal narratives often enforce systemic preferences, things like patriarchy or discrimination against diverse groups. And these narratives are so loud, so pervasive, that even the people suffering under them start to believe them. They internalize them as just an unavoidable truth. To really ground this, the source gives us this powerful case study about a young boy named Ollie. During a counseling session, Ollie's mother describes the systemic racism going on at his school. She points out this very clear pattern where white mothers are given way more leeway in administrative disputes than black mothers. But when the counselor asks Ollie why he thinks this is happening, the dominant story just speaks right through him. He simply says, it just happens that way. He's internalized that societal narrative so deeply that he's lost his own agency to the oppressive weight of a story he didn't even write.
Which brings us to Section 3, Narrative Counseling Principles, Combating the Narrative.
That realization about societal power? Yeah, it's heavy, and it really forces us to ask, if reality is just a story, how do we actually go about rewriting a tragic one? Because we're all embedded in these massive macro systems like culture and society, we can lose our freedom incredibly easily. So in this postmodern paradigm, counseling becomes a targeted way to win back that freedom from the oppression of external, dominant problems.
Michael White, who's a pioneering figure in narrative counseling, highlighted in the chapter, believed counselors have to be hyper-aware of power dynamics. He poses a few absolutely crucial questions for therapists to chew on. For instance, how do we avoid being totally complicit in reproducing the dominant social order? Are we actually sensitive to the politics of gender, race, and sexual orientation?
And what are the appropriate ways to acknowledge the inherent power imbalance within the therapy room itself? Narrative counselors have to actively deconstruct the dominant culture's power by holding it up to the light and looking for personal data that proves it wrong. A therapist has to fully understand their own location when it comes to class, gender, and culture, because if they don't, they risk accidentally enforcing the exact same problem-saturated stories they're trying to help their clients escape.
Let's dive into Section 4, Externalizing the Problem, the signature technique.
Okay, this is the core of everything we've been talking about today. Because people and problems are separate and absolutely not the same thing, the ultimate goal of therapy here is to separate the person from the problem entirely. The problem literally becomes an it. The counselor maps the influence the problem has had on the individual and then conversely, the influence the individual has had on the problem. By declaring the problem as this external it, the client can finally see that sure, the problem has real power, but it can also be handled, it can be challenged. There is just immense relief in realizing that you're not the problem is the problem.
The text actually provides a visual for this, a map of externalizing conversations. This map is essentially the blueprint for taking away a problem's power over someone. It moves through very specific stages, from negotiating a clear definition of the problem, to mapping its widespread effects, to evaluating it critically, and then finally uncovering what the text calls unique outcomes. Let's actually walk through how this map works with a real person in a clinical setting.
The source gives us this really profound case study of Alice, a teenager who was struggling with self-harm and feeling entirely controlled by her parents. Following the map, the counselor starts with Step 1, negotiating an experience-near definition. So instead of using clinical, modernist jargon, Alice gets to name the problem on her own terms. She calls it pretty dangerous cutting. Boom, it's now an it. Step 2 is mapping the problem's effects. The counselor asks, what does pretty dangerous cutting actually do to your life? Together, they realize it's stubborn. It forces Alice to hide, to stay quiet, to just disappear into the background. Step 3 evaluates those effects. The counselor starts questioning the hidden agenda of the self-harm. Why does it demand that Alice hides so badly? And then, the magic of Step 4, identifying unique events. The counselor asks Alice to find a memory where she actually defied the problem's agenda. And Alice remembers she recently tried out for drum major in her high school band. By stepping up to lead, she was directly, powerfully rebelling against pretty dangerous cutting's agenda to make her disappear. Through this structured mapping, Alice separates herself from the problem, reclaiming her identity and her narrative. It's really a game changer.
It's just a remarkably empowering shift in perspective, isn't it? And it leaves us with this final thought to really chew on. What problem-saturated story in your own life needs to become an it? We're all subjected to dominant narratives, but as this postmodern paradigm shift teaches us, reality is socially constructed. We are the authors. If you separate yourself from the problem, what new, unique story are you going to write? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer on Chapter 12 in Narrative Counseling. Keep questioning the narrative, and I'll catch you next time.